Schopenhauer's writings, in addition to his major philosophical work, The World as Will and Representation, are filled with psychological reflections.
One of them deals with people who are easily offended. According to him, the root of this sensitivity lies in excessive subjectivity, a predominant characteristic of humanity. Here, subjective means the inability to see beyond one's own perspective and experiences, which makes it difficult to adopt a broader point of view. For Schopenhauer, intelligent individuals will always face challenges when dealing with the common man. This happens because the higher the intelligence, the more objective and expansive one's view of the world becomes. In contrast, the common man, lacking that intellectual capacity, projects his personality onto everything around him, interpreting anything as a direct reflection of himself. As a result, when everything becomes personal, anything can be offensive. In one of his sarcastic remarks, Schopenhauer observes that even the slightest disturbance to the vanity of certain individuals, no matter how subtle, can make them absurdly sensitive. Another reflection of this excessive subjectivity is egocentrism in conversation. Any topic discussed must, in some way, be connected to their personal experience. As soon as a comment arises, their attention is fixed on the slightest reference that might involve them, either directly or indirectly. This prevents them from seeing things objectively. If the conversation shifts to another topic, their mind quickly closes. This tendency also explains why superficial conversations predominate. The subjective bias makes philosophical, metaphysical, or intellectually demanding discussions more difficult. But, ironically, this lack of objectivity doesn't mean disinterest. Such people can become fascinated by certain topics as long as they manage to relate them to their own reality. An example of this, according to Schopenhauer, is astrology, which illustrates this egocentric tendency. Rather than contemplating celestial bodies as something grand and distant, the individual reduces them to a mirror of their own life. A comet, for instance, is not seen as an astronomical phenomenon, but as a harbinger of disputes or earthly misfortunes. But not everything is negative. This inclination toward egocentrism makes these individuals easily influenced. Schopenhauer notes that they can be won over by flattery, as their opinions are not based on rational and objective criteria, but on subjective perceptions. This not only defines their conversations, but also their worldview. Those immersed in this personal perspective tend to be easily offended and struggle to value concentration and deep thinking. This brings us to one of Schopenhauer's great irritations: noise. Although his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation, was not recognized in his lifetime, he persisted in writing. Decades later, his philosophy began to gain recognition, and one of his minor essays on noise became well known for expressing his aversion to clamor. For Schopenhauer, noise was a killer of thought. He compares the interruption of reasoning to the fragmentation of a diamond or the scattering of an army, as both destroy its strength in the same way. A brilliant mind loses its power when distracted because its advantage lies in focusing all its energy on a single point, much like a concave mirror concentrates light. Noise destroys that ability. In an increasingly noisy world full of stimuli, silence becomes essential. Following his views on society, Schopenhauer advised that people be reserved about their private life. To him, you never know when a friend might turn into an enemy. His rule was simple: never reveal more than someone can perceive for themselves. In this way, one practices the art of thinking before speaking, a skill he valued and summarized in a maxim: there should always be a great space between what we think and what we say. Schopenhauer's first piece of advice is to avoid speaking out loud. The relief that extroverted people feel from doing so should not be encouraged, as it can become a habit. In this way, thought would become excessively tied to words, and conversing would transform into an act of thinking out loud. Additionally, avoiding this habit prevents you from accidentally revealing details about yourself. Often, we mention something because we think others have noticed our insecurities, when in reality, no one has. The attention we pay to our flaws makes us assume that they are obvious to everyone, leading us to make the mistake of commenting on them in conversation. However, the person listening to us probably would never have thought about them. Practicing silence helps avoid situations like this. Another benefit of silence is avoiding the exposure of compromising details. Schopenhauer warns against the tendency of people to take a small fact and create an entire narrative around it. Therefore, when recounting a distant event, care must be taken not to reveal details that could indirectly point to something specific, like a place, date, or irrelevant name. In his Aphorisms on the Wisdom of Life, Schopenhauer discusses secrecy and silence. He advises that you consider all your private matters as secrets and treat acquaintances as if they were complete strangers, letting them know only what they can deduce for themselves. Over time, and under new circumstances, even innocent information can become a burden. He is not referring to friends, but to casual acquaintances. In the future, these people might find reasons to harm you, and even a seemingly irrelevant detail, like the city where you were born or the destination of a trip years ago, could turn against you. His advice on secrecy and silence was written centuries before the internet, but it remains surprisingly relevant. Schopenhauer reinforces that, as a general rule, silence is more advantageous than speech. Demonstrating intelligence through silence is preferable, as it arises from prudence, while speech carries with it a degree of vanity. Opportunities for both are frequent, but the momentary pleasure of speaking rarely outweighs the lasting advantage of silence. So, whenever you face these two options, remember, talking brings short-term benefits, but silence guarantees lasting gains. Personally, I have regretted many more times when I spoke than the times I remained silent. But of course, your experience may be different. Schopenhauer observes that extroverted people feel great relief from speaking alone, but warns that this habit should not be fed, as it can become a pattern. When that happens, thought becomes overly intertwined with speech, leading the person to think out loud even in casual interactions. This results in revelations that should have been guarded with prudence. The ideal, according to him, is to maintain an abyss between what we think and what we say, connecting them only intentionally. He also points out that sometimes we believe others do not trust something true that we assert about ourselves, when in reality they had never even considered doubting it. However, by demonstrating insecurity about our own assertion, we plant doubts where none existed. If we give someone the slightest reason to question what they had never even thought to question, it suddenly becomes impossible to believe. They shift from accepting without question to doubting completely, simply because the doubt was planted in their mind. It's like a cut on the hand that doesn't hurt until you see it. Suddenly, when you look at it, the pain intensifies. For some people, belief and doubt work this way. Schopenhauer follows this logic. Often, we reveal something only because we assume others have already noticed it, like someone gripped by fear, jumping from a great height because they feel they can no longer hold on. The torment of the situation becomes unbearable, and the only way out seems to be immediate termination. This irrational impulse is known as acrophobia, the fear of heights, and arises from the vertigo of looking down. Pascal illustrates something similar. A person may feel sure, but upon seeing the height and the narrowness of the edge, they feel at risk. Some cannot tolerate this contradiction between perception and simply jump into the void. The same happens with secrets and truths. Sometimes we betray ourselves by revealing them, unable to conceive that others don't know them. Thus, we ourselves draw attention to what we want to conceal, awakening others' interest. Schopenhauer warns, never underestimate people's cleverness in matters that do not concern them. No matter how foolish they may be in other areas, people are meddlesome and highly skilled in such matters. You give them a single detail, and they decipher everything else. If you want to tell a story from the past without exposing anyone, be careful not to include dates, places, or names, because those fragments will serve as clues. Once they have a starting point, their curiosity will turn into obsession, driving their intelligence to unravel even the most distant details. They may ignore universal truths, but they become passionate about concrete information. In the digital age, this has become even more evident. Today, someone can discover a person's exact location just from a photo on social media. Schopenhauer, in the 19th century, was already predicting this. Provide a single detail, and people will act like hunting dogs on a trail. When we try to impress, we must remember that the more we speak, the less control we have over the situation. The risk of saying something foolish grows with every word. An old saying reminds us that oysters open during a full moon, and crabs throw stones to prevent them from closing, making them easy prey. Similarly, the more someone talks, the more vulnerable they become. The first Viscount, who lived at the court of Louis XIV between 1673 and 1681, noticed that the king kept state affairs in absolute secrecy. Only his ministers participated in meetings, and he shared his plans only after reflecting at length and making a final decision. His expression was enigmatic. His eyes, sharp as a fox's, never debated state matters except with his ministers. In interacting with courtiers, he limited himself to mentioning his duties and privileges. Louis XIV was economical with words. His most iconic phrase, "L'État, c'est moi," I am the state, was both brief and powerful. His famous "I will see" was one of several short responses he used in any situation. He wasn't always like this. In his youth, he was talkative and appreciated his own eloquence. His mature silence was a strategic mask, leaving everyone around him puzzled. No one knew what he thought or desired, making it impossible to manipulate him with flattery. By listening more than he spoke, he led his courtiers to provide valuable information that he later used with surgical precision. When we speak less than necessary, we inevitably seem more enigmatic and powerful. Human beings seek meaning in everything, trying to decipher hidden intentions. By carefully controlling what we reveal, We prevent others from guessing our thoughts and objectives. This mystery generates respect and often fear. Silence can teach us valuable lessons. Once words are spoken, they cannot be undone. We must learn to restrain ourselves and avoid sarcasm, as the momentary pleasure of a sharp irony never compensates for the consequences. Sometimes, a biting joke can seal the way others see us forever, closing doors that will never open again. Socrates used astute questions to make his interlocutors reveal themselves without speaking much. His famous Socratic irony consisted of questioning with apparent innocence, leading others to reflect and often to contradict themselves. He mastered what he said and even more what he left unsaid, creating uncertainty in his dialogues. This allowed him to guide conversations without directly imposing his viewpoint. An interesting parallel is Sun Tzu, the legendary Chinese strategist and author of The Art of War. He emphasized the value of ambiguity and secrecy in military leadership. For Sun Tzu, silence and ambiguity were strategic weapons, maintaining control while the enemy remained indecisive. He advised, "Simulate disorder and capture the hearts of the enemy. If you are secure, prepare for vulnerability. If you are vulnerable, prepare for security." However, it is essential to understand that silence is not always the best option. In certain situations, it can generate mistrust and insecurity, especially with superiors. Speaking less than necessary is an art that requires prudence and must be applied at the right moment. As Arthur Schopenhauer teaches us, noise tortures the intellect, but silence is its refuge.